We are activating your unique self-discovery one show at a time. The Orchard of Wisdom Self-Discovery podcast are at your fingertips, just waiting to inspire and invite you in discovering just how awesome you really are and how to navigate through life in joy, enrichment, personal abundance, in mind, body, spirit, heart, and soul. All the people we bring you are here to serve you on your journey of life. Do enjoy our next show. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of An Author's Kiss right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest is Leon Conrad from the UK. He says we've been telling stories for thousands of years now. What we learn about story and how it works that we don't already know. In his book, Story and Structure, Leon sheds new light on story, sounding new depths, diving deeper into the sea of a story that everyone has never gone before. And he's here to tell the story of what he's discovered in those unexplored depths. Most importantly, what he uncovers is a pearl of great price from the depths of that sea of story that can help us shape the way we live our life more fluently and harmoniously. Leon was born in London to UK to a Polish father and a Coptic Egyptian mother. He spent his formative years between the ages of 6 and 10 and 18 in Egypt in a multilingual environment among souks, bazaars, catacombs, markets, and the living tradition of oral storytelling straight out of the Arabian Nights. A traditional published author and storyteller, Leon has published extensively in journals, magazines, written theatre stories, contributed to radio programs. He is an avid reader and a keen researcher who loves to find satisfactory answers to questions that we don't have the satisfactory answer to. He's a story structure consultant. Leon works with both fictional and non-fictional writers to help people's thoughts shine through brightly so they can communicate more clearly with their voice and presence. His book, Story and Structure, A Complete Guide, is what we're going to be talking about today, but also the art of a story. Storytelling is really important. If you're telling your story, if you're telling somebody else's story, it's rather like when you see somebody performing in a competition. Technically, they may be absolutely great, but did they touch your heart? Did they really capture that essence that drew you in? And there's a lot of stories out there that are very titillating on the surface, but really what we want to know, as we do with us as human beings, where's the depth? What lies beneath? Who are you really? Welcome to the show, Leon.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Story and structure. I mean, that is, as I've just written my memoir. So, the structure of it, I don't know. I let it flow and it's going to be article form. But a lot of people are writing these days and churning out a lot of books, etc. And where is the depth in it? Where is the heart in it? And I think why are we so attracted to stories is when it engages us, when it ignites our heart and our curiosity, and we're wanting to know more. And as the story goes, it reveals more. Is that your way of thinking?
It is my way of thinking. But before we go into story and the depth of story, I think we should define what story is.
Mm-hmm.
And in my book, I'm very keen on definitions, because if you get the term right, then you know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I distinguish between 4 levels to story. At the very fundamental one, and spell checkers hate this, I distinguish between story and differentiate it from a story or the story.
Mm-hmm.
Story is a phenomenon, a dynamic force, and that is where the depth is. It drives stories, like the story of Cinderella, which can come in many forms, the story of your life. That's what story drives forward. Now, that gives rise to different narratives. You can tell the story of your life in many ways. And you can tell the same story to different audiences in different language. Each of those tellings is going to be a performance
Yes.
or a version of the story. So those are the four levels. You get a particular interpretation of a story, a performance you go and see at the theatre, one of many that's going to be in that run.
Mm-hmm.
It's a performance of a particular play or show. It's a telling, or it's a reading, if you like, of your book, which is published. But it'll be engaged with one reader differently to
Yes.
how another reader will engage with it. That is based on the story structure. And the story of your life is a series of events that you have lived chronologically. And that is the way that story unfolds in our lives. And how we
Mm-hmm.
make sense of those chronologically linked events is where story takes its structure.
Mm-hmm. My mother was an actress and she loved the stage. She didn't really like radio or anything because it wasn't the audience. And she could do the same performance differently every time according to the vibration of the audience. And you pick up on the vibe, and that's the story would shift to that energy. And if you ask people what they got out of it, this is why I think book clubs are great, because people will each have their own interpretation of what they got from the story. And then that becomes a story in itself as well.
Absolutely. The story and story allow this space between to happen, which is broad, which is deep, which is ineffable. And that's where that depth is. Depth reminds me of truth. Truth is said to lie at the bottom of a bottomless well. And story depends largely on truth, even if we tell trickster tales, even if we spin lies as part of the storytelling thing. Why we do that is because truth is important. Truth, goodness, and harmony coming together to support the oneness of being
Mm-hmm.
is really where the depth of story can be found.
It's the connection, isn't it? It's
And it
that.
comes alive.
Yeah, exactly. It
In
has
that
a life of its own. I interview an awful lot of authors and I say now, did you have this character completely all mapped up from beginning to end, or did this character evolve beyond your imagination? And they always say beyond the imagination, the character started going down avenues and doing things that they hadn't mapped out, but it's where the character wanted to go. So they allowed themselves to become that character rather than dictating what that character should be.
And this is what I mean by story being a dynamic
Mhm.
force, a dynamic creating force.
Mm. But my brother's an author, a published author for a long time, and I love reading his books because just when you think you've got it, he takes you down another avenue.
Mhm.
And, where you think it's all about this, no, it's all about that. And the intrigue is there. You want the quote, a page turner, right?
Yes,
You want something that keeps you engaged. You want something that makes you think afterwards. I think the best kind of books are those that have you thinking about it afterwards, thinking about the story, thinking about the character, and even kind of questioning what would I do in that situation? Could I do that? Oh, that's a great idea. Maybe I could do that. And I think there's the engagement, isn't it? We don't want just close book on to the next. We want it to stay with you. We want it to become a part of you in some way.
absolutely. And that's as true for a work of fiction as it is for a
Mm-hmm.
work of non-fiction. And what story and structure does is unpick how that process works at every stage of the journey. At every stage of the writing journey, we depend on story structure. Now, story structure can be mapped very easily, but there are certain rules to it. And what I do is show that it can be much simpler than we have thought it to be in the past. And the rules I present are that you separate each character's storyline and you put the events in that character's storyline in order chronologically. And that includes your reader's storyline. That's where the process that the reader goes is mapped out, and that will be dictating how you tell your story.
Mm.
But the story you tell will also have its structure, and the patterns are the same, but you'll use them in different ways. And you suddenly have, using only 6 very simple symbols, a way of mapping the ebb and flow of story, and you can see where the contrast is, where the surprises come. And whenever there's a surprise, you need to make sure that you provide a balancing move that gives the satisfaction that the reader is waiting for. Wherever there's a huh, you need an ah.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Otherwise, you're leaving them hanging, and they're not really kind of then paying attention to the next moment because you've left
That's
them
right.
hanging. So now this is very much so for fictional writing. But if people are writing, a sense of a memoir, should they write it? I was born, and then I'm not yet dead. Should it be in linear order, or can one jump around? I have jump around into different time periods and what different time periods meant.
Who says what you can or can't do in writing?
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are very strict. There are people who are very relaxed. What I argue in the book, Story and Structure, is that story has its own laws, its own logic.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you work in harmony with those, then be creative, break the rules, but break the rules for a good reason.
Right.
The
Right.
other thing to realize is that there are not just 4 levels to story, but you need to distinguish between story structure, which is the patterns that story follow on this chronological level, and plot pattern, which is how you tell the story, and that can be in any order chronologically. You can start in the middle, in media res, you can go back, flashback, you can flash forward, and there are many ways of working narrative structure, but story structure happens chronologically. And then you can make sense of how these elements that you're using to make up the narrative fit together.
Mm. We see this sometimes in movies where the next scene is a flashback, but they haven't told us that. And it's like this come from this scene, but where the hell does this scene belong? And it can break up the flow of being engaged with the story because you've flashed back, but you haven't told us it's a flashback. You haven't told us the time period. And we're trying to piece these things together and it becomes disjointed. And then when things become disjointed, people become disinterested.
Mm-hmm. And there is a story structure for that.
Right. But we see
It's
many a
called
time in a movie they don't do that.
I know. But for the viewer's journey, it's the editor is setting up a dilemma.
Mm,
And they're not giving the audience the time to resolve that dilemma, make sense of it.
mhm.
So it remains as a huh? You
Yes.
what now?
Yeah.
Which can only be resolved via conversation afterwards. You
Right.
say book clubs are right. That's where you go out for dinner with your friends
Mm,
after a film, you talk about it. What do you think of that? What do you think happened?
mhm,
And that's how you resolve it. This is how story resolves in our lives.
mhm.
And that structure is one of the ones we use in our everyday lives.
Yes.
What I show is that it is one of 18 different story structures, excluding comedy and tragedy.
Mm,
They're separate. 18 story structures we use to make sense of our lives and what happens in them. And we've not noticed this up
no,
to now. This is
no.
new stuff.
Can you give us some of those 18?
Well, the dilemma structure is one of them, since you brought it up. It's risen naturally in conversation. It involves a character, let's say a viewer, going on a journey because, let's say they go on a journey to the cinema because they want to be entertained. They sit down, they encounter the film. And as part of the film, they get engrossed. They are taken on the journey with the story. They're flowing along the narrative lines, and suddenly they hit something that they're puzzled by.
Mhm.
As a result, they take on the main force of the storytelling narrator, and they have to resolve that imbalance in
Mhm.
order to move on with the story. And if they can't, then there's a break. It's a tragic dilemma story.
Mhm.
What I do is map those separate elements using these six simple symbols. The first is a symbol for the character. That's like, what is it like? It's a right angle symbol.
Mhm.
These symbols are taken from the work of George Spencer Brown, who was my mentor. He was a wonderful person. I knew him in the last 4 years of his life. He wrote a classic called Laws of Form, which is an underestimated, undervalued, very little known cult classic in which he revealed the structure underlying both language, logic, and mathematics using these six simple symbols. And I'm the first guy who's applied it
Mhm.
comprehensively to the study of story. So there's an academic background to it, but what I do is try to tell the story of how story works in a very readable way.
Right.
So you start with any character with this right angle symbol. You then experience a problem, and that is a backward pointing barb, like an arrow just with one um, thing, one angle down.
Right.
And through a combination of these backward and forward barbs, you get a pattern. It's like the ebb and flow of the tide. It's like the waning and the waxing of the moon. It's natural. It's like heartbeats. And you get to map the number and quality of the heartbeats. Does a story start with a backward step? Does it start with a forward step? That defines a different quality of how the story would unfold. So within a dilemma story, you get the character mark, you get a backward step, you get a forward step, you get a backward step where the audience is meeting the film for the first time, and then they're encountered with a surprise. And the surprise is, I don't know whether I'm going forward, I don't know whether I'm going
Mhm.
backward. So you have the two
Mhm.
barbs, one on top of the other. And it's only resolved when they get to encounter the resolution of that dilemma, and then that can be released, and they end up with another mark, a right angle mark, that takes them out of the story. Story is framed very importantly by the openings and closings. They are implied in our everyday life, but they are those moments that take us from one dimension of being to another.
Right.
That stepping through the door of the cinema into the auditorium, the lowering of the lights and the raising of the curtain in the theatre, that stepping through the liminal boundary from one mode of being to another.
Mhm.
And somebody pointed it out to me, a friend who'd read the book. He said, "Oh, I realize now why we read stories or tell stories to children before they go to sleep. Stories can end, their stories can be paused, but it aids that transition into
Mhm.
that dream state."
Yes. Yes, and there are many stories that go on in our dreams. We may not always remember them, but yes, there's much going on there. Um, yeah, you've got me thinking. The brain is going now into us. If
What
you have,
stories are being told?
um, if you have, do you have a symbol or anything for like when there's a tease, like something is mentioned, and like more on that later, and what would you call that?
Yes, that would fit into what I call the dynamic story structures. There are linear ones, the
Hmm.
dilemma structure is one of them, and then the dilemma one, the dynamic ones are more to do with how you feel, how you react to what's
Hmm.
happening. And they are very important. What you just described, I could see panning out as what I call a revelation structure. And the revelation structure has three elements to it. And it can be mapped very simply onto the Latin saying veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered.
Mm-hmm.
Let me unpack that for you.
Yes.
I came because I felt something needed to be sorted out. There was a rumor, there was a sense of doubt, a niggly feeling. And so I came in order to investigate. Then I saw. I was able to verify, to see things with my own eyes and say yes or no. But I haven't said anything yet.
Mm-hmm.
In the conquering phase, that's when I either put my plan that I've conceived in my mind into action, or I come out with a definitive statement which says
Mm-hmm.
this is how things are, or this is how things are not.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm able to move forward.
Right. So in a sense, it's a little bit of an engagement. It's a,
Yes,
engagement of, oh, okay, I want to know more of that, so I'm going to read on, but that, whatever that is, may not come up for a while until when it does, go, okay, where are we going now?
there's a beautiful example in the Jekyll and Hyde story, where near the beginning, you see the lawyer going up to his safe and taking out the will to read. And that is a very factual description of it.
Mhm.
How it's set up is that the lawyer usually on a Sunday night sits, has dinner, and then goes to his study and reads some kind of devotional work. But tonight is different. He does have his dinner. Can you see how this sense of doubt is being set up? What's going to happen? What's different? Tonight, he does have dinner, and then he goes up into study, but he doesn't sit down to read his devotional work. He opens his safe, reaches into the deepest, most secret part of it, takes out an envelope on which is written a few words. He very carefully carries it to his seat, sits down, takes a document out of the envelope, and starts reading the last will and testament of, I can't remember whether it's Dr. Jekyll or
Mm.
Mr. Hyde, but can you see how that builds up?
Anticipation.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
yes. What's in the
And
will?
writers refer to it as show, don't tell. But what they
Mm.
don't do is give you that sense of rhythm that you need in
Yes.
order to make the show and tell effective.
I'd like to talk about that word rhythm. I'm not a conventional writer. I'm an article writer. My brother is the novelist, and he's very good at it. Um, and so it was, do I force myself to try and write this in chapter form? And it was like, no, it's not me. I wouldn't be able to do that. So it's been written in article form, and pretty well, you could read any article on its own. But some articles may allude to another article, which is in there as well, which means that you would have to read the other articles to find out where it is. But I speak very much in flow and I write very much in flow. But when it comes to editing, I find that the editing thing wants to change the words, wants to change the structure, wants to change the rhythm. Is rhythm simply not allowed? Or is there a different process for rhythm? Because when it comes to editing, it's so utterly restricted and generic that it's not allowing for you to set the stage the way you want to set the stage.
Talk me through your editing process, Sarah.
Well, I mean, I've just literally been using Grammarly and Word and
Yeah.
going through each one of them, and they will come up with a word they want me to use instead of the 3 or 4 words I've used. But I feel the 3 or 4 words are more descriptive of what I'm trying to write than the one word they want me to do, right? And and it comes up all the time, and it's like, am I being too flamboyant with my storytelling, or should I narrow it down to those little words, which for me kind of loses what I'm saying? But is that really the code that one has to follow?
Not if it's your voice. This is a machine tool which is very
Yeah.
useful to pinpoint areas that you could look at critically. And that's all they do.
Mm-hmm.
They are not setting down the law, they're just giving advice. And their advice is to be taken with a grain of salt. And
Right.
ultimately, you are the author, you make the choices, as long as they are informed choices and you can justify your choices stylistically, grammatically, linguistically, rhythmically. Ultimately, then you own the work.
Mm-hmm.
And at the point where you say, no, I'm pleased with this is how I want it to read, you then give it to some beta readers, live beta readers, who you can trust to give you an honest opinion, some
Right.
honest feedback. I remember I wrote a poem which, when I read, sounds completely convincing, but I gave it to people to read in printed form and they could not hear
Right.
my intonation in it.
Mm.
And so when I sent it out next, I supplied a recording of it, and then it was fine. People got
Right.
the phrasing.
I mean, this book is, a lot of people have asked me to write my book and tell my story because I've been doing this 10.5 years, but I've had, kind of quite an interesting life. And it was finally, all right, all right, all right, I'll do it, And so it's going out to the people that are very much my vibe tribe. And, I know that if I give it to my brother as, a literary master's, he's going to want to change it into a different format, but then it won't be representative of me. And, people who know me, who know the flow of me and know, the journey of me, they want to see that reflection. And I think a lot of time when authors are doing something, they're writing in their own light, whether it be a memoir or whether it be a story, they're writing from their own view and vision. And you can go to an editor that then just tears it to pieces and the voice is lost. And so you really have to pick an editor very well, don't you? One that actually kind of is in your vibe tribe to actually understand what it is you're saying.
Absolutely, and they have to know their craft.
Right.
There are different kinds of editors. I prefer to work with people on story structures. There is very structural I'm very structural in my approach, but I also work on copy editing, line editing, grammar, punctuation, that kind of thing. I enjoy it. I've got that kind of eye, but it's very much a collaborative thing. It's always
Mm-hmm.
about asking the author, what is it they want to try and say? Is this the best way of saying it?
Yes.
What's their audience? How will this come across?
Mm-hmm. Right. And I've said in other shows, yes, I'm writing my memoir. I am sharing a part of me, but if I'm going to try and make it a generic that it's going to please that amount of people, XYZ amount of people, I'm not writing for the audience, if you know what I mean. I'm sharing an essence of me, which is only a few people are going to pick up. And it's if others don't pick it up, they don't get it, that's okay. And I think sometimes authors get caught. I want millions of people to read this. Well, you can do as much as your publication as you possibly can, promoting and everything else. But those that will read it are those that are in sync with it. And we can't all we can do is put it in their way, but we can't demand anybody to read it or say there's going to be millions of people who are going to get it, unless you're J.K. Rowling and a few
Well,
others, right?
J.K. Rowling started out with many, many challenges
Yes,
and just stuck
and many
to it because
rejections.
yes, and she believed in what she was
You're
doing. And
right.
that is ultimately where the pen hits the paper,
Yes. You can
where the rubber
almost see
hits
when
the road.
she was writing it as a movie. I mean,
Mhm.
when you read her books, you completely, saw the stage. And I think that's actually sometimes where authors get lost is that I've lost the visual as I'm reading. And I want to keep the visual. I want as I'm reading the book, I want the movie to be, in sync. And I'm a detail person. What are they wearing? Where are they? This is that I like to know,
Mhm.
because I paint the scene. And if you're suddenly losing it's gone blank, it's run out of reel, you're losing the story. So it's very important to kind of make sure that you're the stage setter as well as the storyteller.
Yes, and there are certain rules or tools that will help you create very vivid descriptions. It's one of the reasons that sometimes Dickens doesn't really work for me, because he'll paint details, but he won't give me the full
Mm.
picture. His characterization is brilliant, but in terms of descriptive writing, I generally often feel something is lacking.
The empty stage, the black and white. It's almost like, well, you can set the stage. I'm giving you the characters,
Yes,
right?
or
Which,
the very limited detail,
hmm
but as you say, blank
hmm
space, you fill it out.
yeah. And which, of course, many people have in their own interpretation in the movies and TV series and everything else that they've
Mhm.
done have created the stage in which for the characters to come alive. And you can watch all of them back to back and there'll be a different interpretation of it, right? Because the
But
stage will
Dickens,
also add to the characters.
that's right, and Dickens was writing at a very different time when
Hmm
people would read his works out loud. So
hmm
they would be staged, they would be
Yeah.
performed vocally, and he would also perform his works
hmm
vocally.
Who's your favorite author? Who's your influencer?
Ooh, I have a great admiration for Philip Pullman.
Hmm
Obviously, George Spencer Brown, to whom the book is dedicated,
hmm
is a great influence. I think he's written one of the underestimated classics, great works of the 20th century in the English language. And Thomas Warton, a Canadian
hmm
author.
Now,
Just
talk to me
love
about.
his history.
Sorry, no, Philip Pullman. You love the Philip Pullman books.
Yes, and his essays
Hmm
as much as his fictional works.
So, which one of the Philip Pullman books do you really enjoy?
Let me give you an unexpected answer, hopefully. It's a little essay he wrote or published as a talk which he gave to the National Association of Teachers of English, called Perverse, All Manner of Wondrous Things, or something. It's got the word perverse in the
Hmm
title. And he absolutely captures the essence of what language is as a living thing.
hmm
And he focuses on uncertainties, mysteries, doubts as the
Yeah.
inspiration for writing.
hmm
It's a
hmm
glorious piece of demonstrating what the writer can do in writing by a consummate writer.
And you, gosh, what do they call it? Northern Lights. I
Love
can't.
it. In fact, I quote from Northern Lights in
It's
Story and Structure. That
one
scene
of my
where
favorite books. Yeah, which scene? Which scene
the
is one of
scene
my
where
favorite?
Lyra and Father Coram
Hmm
are together, and she's reading the alethiometer in his presence for the
hmm
first time, and he doesn't understand how she's doing it, but he's a chess player and he
mm
knows how chess players map these invisible lines of strategy through the board and see the chess play and the gameplay panning out. And she's doing the same with the alethiometer. The
mm.
alethiometer is a truth-telling device.
Yes.
And I liken the way of working with dynamic story structures to this process. It's an intuitive deep dive into a relational position with story. You have to feel your way into the truth of the story.
Yes. Oh, well, I tell you what it did for me. I'm a very spiritual person, and I'm always talking about soul awakening. That's the soul wisdom comes through your heart, in ignition of truth. It lifts up your spirit into action, and your mind will know what it needs to know when it needs to know it. And when I first read those books, and I looked at it as the soul as the companion, and the companion changes until reach the puberty, and then that soul becomes, that's that particular representation of their soul. And for me it was such envy. God, I wish I had my soul on the outside, that was one actually physically talking to me and being my companion. But I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the movies, but I think the Dark Materials has done a very good job, much better than the film. But the books themselves, the characters, I still talk about them today. I think I read them 22 years ago, and it's just it's, through the dimensions. My brother is very much a dimensional writer too. He'll write through different worlds, etc. But I love that. Anything that takes us out of this world in a sense, and has us look at life from a different dimensional point of view, different layers, and understanding where our blockages are, which is the repression of the ministry. But I just love the characters. I love how they came alive. I love everything about it. And it really, for me, was a really kind of a soul opener for me, most certainly. I love the way he writes. What about the Lord of the Rings? Do you like the interpretation that has happened there with the movies, or did you read the books at all?
Well, which movie are you talking about? I think there have been
I know,
4 or
gosh, yes.
5.
Yeah, I know.
I remember back in the day when the cartoon version first came
Oh,
out, the
right,
animated
yes.
version.
God, that
Yes,
was what, 30 something years ago?
something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And again, another one of those books where I read The Hobbit first. And again, that was another world. I love mystical worlds. I love, a different layer type worlds, but it was another one that really got me intrigued. And, with The Lord of the Rings, a little hard to read, better to see the interpretation, because again, there's so many layers that you can sometimes get a little too layered up to kind of know where you're going, if you know what I mean. But again, I love the interpretation of what they have done with the books. But Philip Pullman, most certainly for me, with here they call it the Golden Compass. Over in England, it's
Mhm.
Northern Lights, isn't it?
Yes.
And I really love what they've done with the series. It's beautiful. And there's always those authors, isn't it, that they're like a good friend that you can always rely on. You can pick up any one of their books, and it's like going out for dinner with a good friend and having a great conversation and being
Hmm.
taken on an adventure.
Yes. I don't have much to add to that.
So
But that's
those,
why my study is lined with books.
yes, yes, if you saw what I've got around me here too.
Yeah.
um, I think also, I'm a reader that when I read, it's not a chapter a night before going to sleep. It's leave me alone. And I just want to curl up somewhere and just read. If I can't read it in one day, read it in a couple of days, because I get so immersed in it. And if I did a half hour before going to sleep, I wouldn't be able to sleep because I'd be going over and over and over the chapter and what's happened since then. What kind of reader are you?
I typically go through phases. I went through a very long phase of reading young adult literature. I absolutely loved it. I did not want to read
Yeah.
anything else. And then something happened, and I'm currently in my non-fiction phase.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to do with philosophy
Mm.
or difficult questions, that's where I'm at the moment.
That's my brother. That's his writing. What I always love about his books, as I said, it's always different layers. And he decided to go into the youth genre because it allowed him to explore even more and go into those different levels and different dimensions. And it is always, the page turner. He always has a dog in it. And it's always the problem of keeping the dog alive. And he's like, oh God, I don't know how to get this dog out of this situation. And it's this genuine love story. But, one of the ones he wrote that was quite intriguing, which is The Repercussions of Thomas D. And it's a young guy in his high teens talking to his girlfriend on the phone, and he walks through a kind of a black hole and ends up in 1944 and ends up spewing everything that happens in the future to the wrong person, which changes the course of the war and the repercussions of it today. And see, what I always find, but that's what I love about an author. Yes, you can give me something that's kind of maybe far out like that, but it leaves you the thought, well, yeah, what if it had been different? Where would we be having the freedom that we have today to moan and groan about how miserable life is? Or would we actually be living in the misery? you know? So I love books that kind of, it's the after dinner mint, right? That keeps on going.
Yes, and there you are. You've had an inciting incident that sets up this need to find a resolution to a problem. And this is what story does.
Yes.
It's an innate, embodied thing we do to make sense of life, to make sense of how we come to terms with our surroundings. And what's nice about losing yourself in story, particularly if it's a fantasy story or a traditional folk tale, maybe a wonder tale, is that you get characters like fairy godmothers or angels or demons, and you have to open your eyes in wonder and accept them and delight in their presence. But do you and I have fairy godmothers?
No. I wish
I
we did.
do.
Wish they had a magic. Yeah, you do kind of when you look at your best friends, they could be your fairy godmother or your angel, right?
But the thing about story and structure, I went on a voyage of discovery when I went this. I didn't know where it was going to take me. And where it took me is further and further away from content and closer to what was happening underneath.
Right.
What are the rhythms of the things? So the further away you get from saying, oh, fairy godmother, no, I don't have that, you think, what is the fairy godmother all about? And actually, you do have fairy godmothers, you do have guardian angels, you do have, and some people see them as angels. Blake saw angels all over the place. He saw the soul of his brother after his brother died. He was a visionary. I'm not, but I can relate to these metaphysical forces and energies in myself, and I identify them with things like the intellect, intuition, instinct. And what you were saying earlier on about your knowledge that is deep inside you, yourself, which can come out and inspire you if you get out of the way.
Most certainly.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, all about this. And then you need to filter it through reason. You need to take a critical eye to it. You need to describe it in detail. That's where the hard work comes in. But the germ, the source, the essence is in that magical realm where things like fairy godmothers and gods, goddesses arise, and they are within us.
Always. Always. As I said, I'm a very spiritual person. I was one of these people that played with dead people. Why doesn't anybody else see them? How come it's only me? I'm a channeler. That's why I call it the wisdom channeling, going into the knowledge. If we're only going from knowledge, we're on a limited human knowledge. When we allow the divine wisdom, whatever that divine wisdom looks like to you, whether it's source, energy, God, spirit, whatever it is, when we allow that wisdom to be our clarity, we see the knowledge that we need in that moment of time, and we understand what to do with that knowledge in that time. It doesn't always work the other way around. If we only step into knowledge, this step, then this step, then this step, we're limiting ourselves. When we combine it with that wisdom, the wonderment wisdom, the allow wisdom, the coming through you wisdom for you to know what to do with that next step and how to expand it into something that is wondrous, that is beautiful, that also leaves people with the question, is this real? Can it be real? And when people come out of it and go, I feel it is real, then you know that you've actually told a story where you've taken people out of their limitations as a human being and shown them the human essence of being a part of something bigger.
I think that's beautiful, Sarah, and that speaks to a key component of what I've found about how story works. It's nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
We can expand and contract stories.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you the story of the three little pigs in 3 sentences. 3 little pigs go out to seek their fortunes. They build houses, some of which are destroyed by a wolf, and they end up living together in harmony, living their lives, their best lives, as pigs together, having defeated the wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Or I could spin it out for
Yes.
10, 15, 20 minutes and give the huffing and the puffing,
Yep.
which all make the story work. But this idea of expansion and contraction, there is a nugget there.
Mm-hmm.
And story and structure is about being able to boil down a story, reduce it to the bare bones. What are the essential parts
The
of a
ingredients.
story,
Mm-hmm.
and what do they look like for
Mm-hmm.
each character's storyline?
Mm-hmm.
Once you've got that, you realize that characters who are divine, metaphysical, have their own particular type of storyline.
Mm-hmm.
They're the most compressed.
Yes.
They see something and they go bang and things change.
Yep.
They don't say, when Athena, I think it is, looks down and sees a woman who's being chased by a god, and the woman is calling up for help, Athena doesn't look down and say, now what should I change her into today? Raven, tree, river. No, rivers are Tuesdays. Today's a Wednesday. I think, now what kind of creature should she be? It just doesn't happen like that.
No.
That's what happens on the level of the human
Mm-hmm.
deliberation in
Yes.
stories. For the divine realm, it's
Mm-hmm.
bomb, bang.
Yeah.
And that's the transformation structure.
Yes. It's been
The
out of our own way.
But what I've discovered, which is new, is that the transformation structure is related to the quest structure, which is how we solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an expansion from it. And when you expand that initial backward step, that transgression against natural order, stay with that energy. There's a problem, there's a journey towards finding a resolution, and then there's a meeting, and there's that tension again. A single backward step can expand into a backwards, forwards, backwards.
Mm-hmm. Cha-cha-cha.
Yeah. And that's the rhythm, that's the dance of story, and I'm mapping it out. And what I've noticed is that that initial negative move, that step, when you expand it, contains within it the seed of the positive, because that meeting we ended up with is going to be the meeting with the friend or helper.
Yes.
Who helps you solve that problem, but you don't know that yet. You're still stuck in that energy.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
Yeah.
And then in the transformation structure, that very compressed thing where you've just got two moves, the god or goddess goes bang, and there's a transformation. Things are changed. The energy is rebalanced. Things go back to being able to flow, but they're never going to be the same as they were.
No.
In the quest structure, which is the expanded form, you do get that meeting with the friend or helper, but that brings forth the meeting with the enemy or hindrance, the wolf, in the story of the Three Little Pigs, that needs to be defeated.
Mm-hmm.
So that positive thing has within it the seed of the negative and the potential to defeat it.
Right.
Learning about this level of story and how the energy is related, how the metaphysical connects to the physical, in this embodied way we have of making sense of the world, can affect our life stories positively, because then we can understand how to make sense of these insights, how to make sense of this intuitive knowledge we have, and expand it into the world we live in, the everyday 9 to 5, 7 days a week, 5, whatever it is.
And I mean, that's why reading is so important, isn't it? Because, again, the companion, be a skill or a tool that you can learn from it. It can be an answer to a problem that is initially in your life. I think we pick up a book intuitively because that's the book you need to read right now. And if you read it and allow it to immerse into, to penetrate into you, then you'll actually find it has a solution in there to actually a problem in your own life. And that's the beauty of a book, and especially of a book that you allow yourself just to pick up. If I go to a bookstore, I wander around and there's a book that will come out and jump out at me. You need to read me. And invariably, I always find something in there when I close that book or a certain chapter. I understand. I understand. This character is doing this, but what it's allowing me to do is find a solution to that or see my problem from a different point of view. Is the wolf really the enemy? Can't you negotiate with the wolf? Hey, look, this is our
Absolutely.
territory. Leave us alone, right? We won't come to your territory. You leave us alone. We're not your dinner, right? One doesn't know until you try. Or is the wolf hell bent, right? So I think it's the reflection on our own lives is where the gift of reading is that would I do the same thing? Can I bring something of that character into my own life? That strength of that character, that resilience of that character, that wisdom of that character? Can it open up something inside of me for me to find that in myself? And I think, again, it's that extension, that friendship, that companion, that tutor that reading can do for you.
And it's not just about reading,
Mm-hmm.
Sarah. The written word is only a very weak symbol of the spoken word. And
Yes,
we were telling stories loads longer than they started being written down.
right. Round the campfires.
And
Yes.
the best stories I've come across have been where I've experienced them from oral storytellers,
Yes.
particular, particularly storytellers who live and work in either traditional societies or are tradition bearers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
don't just read stories, Sarah.
Yes.
Go
Right.
and listen to
No, you,
them.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, but whether the story is a book or whether it's an audio, whether it's TV or whether it's movie, it is what is that story doing for you? Because it's there to do something for you. And when we can put it away or switch it off and go, ah, I see differently, I feel differently, or that was really delicious. You know, it's how does it affect you? If you've forgotten it immediately, then it obviously didn't resonate very much.
Mhm.
But if you start talking about it because it did do something, then you know it most certainly. You absorbed it and in some way became it in some level. But yes, storytelling comes in all forms. And I think a good story, like a good TV drama or um, the audio, this is the thing. If you're going to have your book made into an audio, make sure you've got somebody who's got that storytelling voice, right?
Yes, and it's not just the art of words that can move us. There's beauty in music, in
Yes,
painting, in sculpture,
yes,
in nature. Story speaks through it all.
yes. I have another music genre where I interview musicians, and you know what I love about musicians in many ways is they're not in discovery of who they are. They are the music. You know, they're just in discovering how to survive by playing the music. But their connection to their music is the instrument and them, whether it be their voice or an instrument, they are one. And with every chord or with every trumpet, with every voice that they sing, they're singing their truth, their connection. And then we then relate to it in so many ways. And as you said, with the art, I have here a painting I love over here. It's flowers of so many different colors. And the beauty of I love about it is the fluidity and the movement of those flowers. If I ever need to be kind of just boosted up, I just absorb the colors and absorb the movement of it, and it can pick me up. But that is, again, the picture's giving me a story, isn't it? And it's igniting one inside of me.
Harmony.
Harmony.
It's relinking you to a sense of harmony, of truth, of goodness, and connecting you in some way to something bigger, the oneness of being,
Yes.
which is what story does, what every true work of art does,
And the
and what we
compliment
can
to
do
it,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think what the compliment is whether it book, TV show, whatever the medium is that if you are talking about it, if you really did feel it, if it did have an impact on your life in any way, then that was a story well told. And it allows our own story to come out, our own reflection of who we are, because you absorb that story, and as I said, you can become a part of that extension of that. And I find if we just live what I call the humanoid state of being, which is just intellect, just head knowledge, and the restriction of being a human being, we have eliminated ourselves and limited ourselves completely from the immersement of living. But when we embrace our essence of our soul, our spirit, our multidimensional selves, and we're willing to explore and expand and allow things that don't make sense to the human mind, but they make sense to the spirit, that clarity will be revealed, and it just allows us to spread our wings so much more and embrace so much more and not live on this narrow limitation.
So, if anyone is listening to this and thinks, well, I'm a writer and I want to get into the way of interacting and engaging with story in that way, then maybe story and structure is for you, because it does deal with this ebb and flow, this energy of story, which you can feel into without needing words, without needing archetypes, without needing images. They will come.
Yes.
Because every story structure I've found has a purpose. It is linked to a particular kind of problem, and it reveals the most efficient way of solving that particular kind of problem. And if we engage in that, if we start to feel our way through those patterns, then what I've found by working with them is they become instinctive, and I can find those ways past tension, emotional hang-ups, and instead of wanting to fight a wolf because I see a wolf and know the wolf is going to get me, whatever I do, I can say, well, like you did, is there another way? What is the wolf really wanting?
Yes.
Maybe we can find a way to keep the wolf fed on a healthy diet that doesn't mean we get killed.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
there are ways around it, but we've got to, another thing in the book, we've got to beware of our own inner trickster. We can be lulled into a false sense of security. Got to be on the lookout for that. We're not always right. In fact, the human race is the best example in the animal kingdom of getting it wrong.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And it is that ability to balance reason and emotion, spirit and matter, keep that harmony, keep that balance, keep that truth, keep that goodness, not just feeling what is good for us, but what is good universally, not just globally or on
the
level
beyond
of
this
humanity.
world. Oh, yes.
Universally.
Yeah.
And if you're sensitive to that, then things will flow.
You understand, why you're here. You're in discovery. What is your instrument? What is your instrument in life? Everybody's been given a divine gift. What is your instrument? How do you play it? How do you play it harmoniously? And which orchestra do you join? Where as each individual, you can come together harmoniously to create a symphony that will resonate out in invitation to everyone else. But we are in discovery of our own instrument. And that instrument shouldn't be by the restriction of the human dictation, but should be driven by the very soul and spirit essence of who we are and what we're here to do.
And that I would identify with story life stories. So what are your life stories? What is our collective life story?
And we all have one. We all have a story inside of us, a story that needs to be expanded, and we're all telling our story one way or the other. We're in our interaction daily. We're telling our story, we're sharing our story, which then comes down to a reflection. Is this the story you really want to represent you? There's always change, right? We can always change the plot.
Yes, and we can reveal things, we can hide things, we can be open about things. Ultimately, it is.
Mm.
Life is
And we
in all
are.
its glory. We
Yes.
are, and we are story.
Yes. It's being present. I think if we are in the present, what we need to know, when we need to know it, is in the present. And when we are in that present, we're truly connected. And we're very engaged with what we need to be doing in that moment. And that's where, if you step out of the human intellect and allow the divine intellect to come through, what you need to know and what you need to be doing right now can be revealed, and revealed with ease and with clarity and with fluidity. If we can get out of ego, if we can get out of lack of self-worth or doubt, and if we
Mhm.
can get out of greed or self-importance.
And that sounds wonderful, wonderfully easy, and you do it so well. But as Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, if I've got his name right, says, he's the expert on flow. It takes time to
Yes,
develop that
yes,
skill, that craft, that ability to
the willingness.
flow.
Mm,
And once you do, you are able to manifest yourself. The Greeks called it kairos, seizing the moment, not
mm-hmm,
chronos, which is the divided, atomized view of time, but kairos is being in the moment, where
mm-hmm,
past, present, and future merge. And kairos was depicted as a young god, very fast, with a forelock and a bald back of his head. Because if you didn't manage to catch him at the front, you wouldn't be able to hang on to anything. He'd
right,
be gone.
yes,
And he's captured with a wheel because he's permanently turning, permanently there, but the center of the wheel is in the here and now, the eternal now.
yes. We only have this moment. And
That's where it is.
and this moment will dictate your next moment. So if you live in clarity, in willingness of this moment, again, allowing, that this moment will seed those beautiful possibilities, but you must water and nurture for the next moment. But if we're living
Mhm.
in the past and we're living in the future, we're not in our story. We're reviewing a story from the past, and we're projecting a future story that cannot come to pass because you're not present in the now.
And it's very difficult to be present and also evaluate. How can you live the story, experience it, and also write it? How can you live the story and experience it and also tell it? That's what a great oral storyteller will do in
Yes.
the moment. And that's why I think oral storytelling is so powerful, because the story is unfolding within the
Mm-hmm.
storyteller and the story seeker, and it's happening in the same space between. As you said, your mother experienced telling the story,
Yes.
performing the role a different way every night, slightly different. It wouldn't be dramatically
No.
differently, but it would be
A little different nuance.
noticeably different
Mm-hmm.
according to what the moment was dictating, what the
Right.
moment
What
needed.
the energies were, what the signatures out there, right? And this is
And
why it's
you,
important about that.
if you are a reader, sorry to interrupt,
It's
Sam,
okay. No, no.
if you are a reader, then the onus is on you
Yes.
to make more of that advance. The
Right.
writer will have done their job, hopefully, but it's not as dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
You have to engage with their imagination,
Yes.
their power of writing.
You're in the
Exactly.
story. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the great writers that manage to transcend that boundary of the written word to have that inspiration come alive again in you, in the unfolding the story, that makes great works great.
I have my own show genre every week, Sarah's View of Life, and sometimes I don't know what I'm going to talk about, or maybe one word will be there, and I'll press record. And for the next either 10 minutes, 17 minutes, up to half an hour, what comes out is what comes out. And I was going to audio my book, and I kind of started. And then one day I thought, okay, I'll just see what I write. And then just wrote again, just let what was inside of me just come out, and read it later and find out what I said, right? Because that's who I am. That's the way I need to be. The more I think about it, the more I'm going to trip myself up. I can have the certain structure if I want to address this, this, and this, but how I'm going to address it, where and when I'm going to address it, I allow that to unfold as it wants to come out.
So, Sarah, what got you to the point that you could just sit down and have the words flow through your fingers?
One, I shut down my podcast for months so I could concentrate on it. I think for me is should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? There was a lot of other people. You should do this. You should do this. You should do that. And then it got to a point as well. This is my story. I need to tell it in the way I will. I'm not a chapter person. I'm an article person. Short stories, some that can reflect more information later on, some that are complete in themselves. And it was like, just let it be. Just let it be. Step out of all the chatter. And you should, you must, you do this, you do that, and just let it get down there. And then it can be edited and reconstructed afterwards. But this is your truth. Let your soul speak and just let it come out.
So, what is it about articles that zing with you?
I don't know. I suppose that I think it might be my energy flow. I'm rather like a phoenix, up and then into the flames and then the ashes. So it is that short period of time of what I say or what I write, and then it's where the issue is, how I got to understanding, and then what I did to resolve. And that's just I think what's chosen me. My storytelling has always been like that. I was a dormitory monitor at boarding school, and the kids wouldn't go to sleep unless I told them a story. But then I would have to go downstairs and write 200 lines. I will not speak after lights. So I'd write it in the daytime so I could go down and just finish off a few lines so I can go back to bed. But the kids would not go to sleep without me telling them a story. So, and I used to do it with my own kids, is I would take something that they've done in the day and then do a story about a hero that faced whatever they faced in the day, which was quintessentially about them, but about a character. And it's always been the way I've been. My brother, as I said, can write those chapters. He can take all of those chapters into a beautiful crescendo of his books. I love his writing. I love where he takes me, all the beautiful worlds and everything he takes me into. But I'm just that short phoenix.
And yet, your inspiration, your medium, the fire that the phoenix thrives on and then gets immolated into, is for you language and words.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that link come from for you?
My mother and my brother have always been word people, and my lineage and my father on my mother's side, going back to 500, um, or we're all literary or academic or lawyers or judges, but always words. So my word telling is through this medium and through articles, my brother through books, and my mother through an actress. And words have always been something to dance to, whether it's been written or whether it's been spoken or whether it's been acted. It's our musical instrument.
And there you go. It says it
Mm-hmm.
all.
I mean, you can have politicians that are extremely eloquent in their storytelling. That's how they get so many people on board, right? And then you have some politicians that can't put two sentences together, and you go, "You're definitely not a wordmeister." But this is why some people can gain power through the words, the way they tell the story, and the way they engage people. And I think it's whether you use it for good or for bad, that is your conscience, right? Hopefully for good. But again, I think it also comes into the allow. My storytelling is it's always not from my head, but from my heart and soul.
And it's up to us,
Mm-hmm.
whenever we listen to a story being told, to be on our guard, because
Mm-hmm.
storytellers can be tricksters.
Yes. Oh boy, can they. Yes. Read between the lines sometimes, folks. Are they being the Pied Piper? Right. Um, Do you remember the book Inkheart?
Yes.
Which I love that whole story, that as they tell the story, the characters come out of the book, but then somebody else has to go back in. And again, it's that wonderful word of imagination, of it not just being flat words of pages on a book. It is again the dimensional story that is there. I love things that take me into other worlds, because I'm a world other dimensional traveler anyway, and it's just I love that, how we can open up a different portholes, and there is a
Hmm.
parallel world going on, which we see with Philip Pullman, which should be more in the next series that comes out with Dark Materials, um, because I think to live just as I call them humanoids, sorry, a human being that is just limited to the linear of life with no exploration and no wonderment and no sense of adventure or expression is very robotic. And I think if we can, as human beings, let our wonder open up and wonder what else is out there, wonder what the next adventure is, be the
Hmm.
seeker, which is innate within us, then we would be the story that we are, which then others are inspired by.
And that sense of wonder is one of the drivers of story.
Yes.
And it ends up by inviting you to explore and follow what I describe in the book, Story and Structure, as the creation myth structure. The
Mm-hmm.
beginning of Genesis 1, God creates the world, and he creates one thing after another and another and another, and it just unfolds. He doesn't create because there is a problem, he doesn't create because there's a sense of lack. It's God said, let there be light, and there was light, and he saw light, and it was good. And that process just unfolds, just as I think we are called to unfold,
Mm,
whatever it is we're undoing. But it takes time to get to that point.
yes. And the art of what is our story and how do we tell it? Because there still has to be some structure. You can build the most beautiful building. If the foundation isn't strong, if the structure in which it was built on isn't strong, it's going to crumble at the first huff and puff, right? So structure and rooting and grounding needs to be in there so that it can branch out and reach for the skies.
And be beautiful as well, not just
Yes,
functional.
right. Oh God, yes. Yes, we see plenty of the, just functional, and it's little boxes, and they're so uninviting and they're almost repelling. But when we see a piece of art, which was somebody's story, the carvings, the sculpture of the building, even the different type of windows, all of that, it's somebody's interpretation, it's somebody's story, somebody's reflection. And that gives us a sense of intrigue. I think if you lose the intrigue, then you lose the wonderment of life and you've lost the reason for living.
Mhm. And story is another facet of that pattern making instinct.
Mm-hmm.
A pattern of intrigue, of form, of
Yeah.
emotion, reason, space, time, working with those things, whether you go up, whether you go out, whether you go down, whether you go forward. It shapes you, it shapes us, it shapes me,
Mm-hmm.
it shapes the buildings we choose to put up, live in, work in, engage in.
Mm.
It's an invitation to
Mm-hmm.
be creative, imaginative. I have a friend at the moment who's working and staying at a wonderful place in the States called Ilan Lael. James Hubble, the architect, who
Mm-hmm.
builds houses that look like hobbit houses
Oh, yes,
that are
yes, yes,
filled with rainbows, and you
yes.
can go in there and wake up bathed in light, go out into a swimming pool and swim through a rainbow. It is
Mm.
absolutely magical.
Yes, and we need magic, don't we?
We do
You know,
real magic,
oh
not
gosh,
just
and then
sleight
we're
of hand.
capable of making that real magic. We really are. Those moments, those moments, those moments that just have your breath, your eyes open in wonderment. everything that becomes still in that moment, in that wonderment, is really what Earth is all about and its beauty. And it's always a question, how do we structure that beauty into something that is functional for us, that gives us that beauty continuously?
And people have had this conversation. They have thought about this. It's all about sustainability. It's all about management of stewardship, returning what we use in a better state than we received it, not a
Yes.
worse one.
Living in gratitude too. Much better attitude, right?
Yes.
It says inspiration begets invitation. And when you're inspired by something, it invites you to want to be engaged in your own life or with other people or with the wonderment of life and what is possible. There was a wonderful program, I think it was on Netflix, architectural buildings around the world. And some of them were just like, oh my God, how did they think that up? And just so exquisite, again, capturing the light or capturing this or capturing that. And some of the places, oh, I couldn't live there. Some of the places, when can I move in? Because it just made you feel so at home. And really, kind of honestly, that's really where we want to feel, isn't it? We want to, whatever we do, whatever our story is, or whatever story we hear, we want to feel at home. We want to feel comfortable and comfortable enough to feel we can branch out, we can explore. Whether you are at home, or whether your home is within yourself, and that you're comfortable in taking those next steps forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but what do you mean by self, Sarah?
Your own light being able to project.
Interesting. It is a resonant question because one of the books I'm reading at the moment, and in response to the death of Queen Elizabeth II, I've gone back to a book by L.L. Blake, The Young Person's Guide to the Constitution. And he riffs around a passage from the Upanishads, the Katha Upanishad, where the collective wisdom of the Upanishads describes the self as riding in the chariot of the body. The chariot is being guided by the intellect. The intellect is holding the reins. The reins connect the intellect to the horses are the senses. And the senses drive the chariot down whichever road they end up going down, whether that is the horse's choice or whether it is the charioteer's choice.
Or a
Depending on
synergy.
which choice it is, it will be a different road.
Right.
But the best road is what the Upanishad argues, is the road which allows the self to direct the intellect and advise the intellect where to go.
My
And
interpretation of the soul, heart,
exactly.
spirit to the mind. Yes, the
And
soul wisdom.
what L.L. Blake does is to liken this to the analogy of the queen's or the monarch's symbolic role in maintaining this unity and harmony of this very, very valuable constitutional monarchy that has evolved in this unwritten constitution over centuries. That is something we do not often reflect on and appreciate in the way it should be appreciated.
I did a little bit on the Queen when she died on one of my shows.
I
Kind of a
actually listened
tribute.
to that one.
Oh, you
Yeah.
did too.
Yeah.
But it is about what has she given us? It is, what is it in our lives that we can give of our essence, be committed to, be dedicated to, because we believe in it. Her duty was imposed upon her. She had no choice, but she took it on gracefully. I mean, she would have far rather been breeding horses or racing horses. I mean, that was her love, being free on a horse. But she put country and duty even ahead of her own family. And because the Commonwealth was her family. And she was the mother of that family, and she did it with a great deal of grace. And in her later years, a great deal of humor. And, it's a reflection on all of us to look at, well, what do we stand for? What are we dedicated to? Again, back, finding your instrument, how to play it, but whom are you playing it for? Does it benefit them? Does it benefit the collective? Because we're all contributors. Every single one of us is contributors on this planet. But what are we contributing? Does it benefit everyone? Or is it only the beneficial of ourselves? And I think the reason why a lot of people are grieving so much, whether you like the royal family or not, is that who else is one of the greatest examples of dedication, of commitment, without losing herself, of a representation of something that is deep and meaningful. And quite honestly, all around the world, whether it was the Commonwealth or not, an example to us, a true example to us.
And that took time to
70
develop.
years. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. There's a story he tells about the young Princess Elizabeth going to a concert with her grandmother, Queen Mary, and she was fidgeting in her seat. And Queen Mary turned to her and said, "Do you want to go home, child?" And she said, "Oh no, I couldn't go home, Grandmama. There are people waiting for me outside when the concert ends." And Queen Mary turned to the lady in waiting and said, "Please take the young princess back to the palace. She must not learn that people are there for her enjoyment. She is there to serve the people. Take her through the back door so that she may not be seen." It was a lesson.
It was a lesson, which is, I think, one thing we could actually say about the Queen. You didn't see ego. You saw honor and pride, but you didn't see ego. It was very much about the duty. And there are a few people in the world that you look up to, and you know that their contribution to the world has been at a sacrifice. But their belief in what they're doing and why they're doing it and what they stand for is far greater than them as an individual.
And that may be where we end up, because we all have that still small voice inside us. I refer to it as the voice of the unknown storyteller, who I think very often just is there in the distance, chuckling away at what we do,
Waiting to
and
have its voice.
sometimes is delighted because we've realized what that unknown storyteller, he or she, we're never going to be able to know them, what they want to have realized about themselves.
Again, it's opening your door to set yourself free, isn't it? It's not, you talk about patterns. The architect creates a pattern. How we build that house from that pattern, sometimes they can interject or is another interpretation. But I think one of the things that we need to let go of is programming. And which program are you running on? Because many a time that programming is killing the essence of who you are, not even allowing yourself to shine through because you're living on an old programming. But we can always reprogram, and we can always delete programs. And that comes into recognizing what that program is, the willingness to go through the process of deleting it and inserting a new program that serves you and what you are meant to do here better.
Or simplifying. George Spencer Brown was all about simplification and getting rid of unnecessary baggage, reducing it to the bare bones, the essential stuff.
Yes.
Like love.
Yes.
So important.
Be the love you seek. Be the peace you seek. You're not, it's not on the outside, it's on the inside. When you change your perspective, you change the way you look at life, and you look at life in all its beauty and glory and opportunities and possibilities, and you immerse yourself lovingly into that, you become the love you seek.
And from a tree's perspective, going back to the way Tolkien describes trees and the Ents, that's one of my favorite parts of Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
They take things slow. They see things
Yes.
come and go, and the names change, but there is this essence which is worth connecting to and loving. And they just get on with life.
Mm-hmm. Did you see the Judi Dench's documentary on trees?
I didn't.
Highly recommend it. If there's where you can see it, I'm not quite sure where it is now, but it's wonderful. And it's talking about the matrix, the fiber optics between the trees,
Mm-hmm.
and how everything is connected. And even when one falls, how it becomes a life substance for other creatures. And a forest doesn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're not an elk, you can't be here."
Yes.
You know, it is that unity of looking out for each other through all storms and beauty of life. And this is why many times people fear the forest. I have an entire program that takes people through the forest, metaphoric forest, to find out who they are, where they are right now. And a lot of people are afraid of the forest because in a lot of ways it represents life. And they're scared they won't find their path, or they'll get lost in it, or they'll be suppressed in it, instead of looking at the trees as the wisdom that they are, and how through the beautiful breeze and the rustle of the leaves that they speak to you, and give you that path before you if you're willing to listen. It's a good
Yes.
documentary, recommend that.
Thank you. I'll look it out.
We are going to have to call this quits now. Unfortunately, I didn't want to because I love to carry on talking to you, but please tell people how they can get hold of your book and what is your site and any other mediums that you want to share.
So, Story and Structure. This is the hardback edition. You can see the paperback edition behind me. Where are my fingers there? It is available on my website, leonconrad.com/writer. It is available on standard sites. If you're a fan of Amazon, go to amazon.co.uk, amazon.com. It's available via bookshop, via just look for it online.
Right.
And you'll find me on Substack. You can subscribe to my newsletter there and keep in touch.
Right. And of course, you're on Twitter, you're on Medium, you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, you're on YouTube. And all people have to do here is go to selfdiscoverymedia.com and then search, put in your name, Leon Conrad. As LeonConrad, and his show page will come up with his book with all of the links that you need in order to reach him. And please look at your own story differently. How are you sharing it? How are you telling it? When it comes to writing it, when it comes to speaking it, when it comes to living it, what is your story? What impact is it having on other people? And what are other people's stories having an impact on you? That we're all storytellers in one way or the other, aren't we?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Remember, folks, we want to know your story, whatever it is, in whichever way you wish to tell it, whether it be through music, through words, through action, whatever way, because the story is who you are and why you're here and what it is you're here to do. And we want to encourage that story and embrace it and celebrate it. So until next time, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Find all of our shows on selfdiscoverymedia.com under podcasts or selfdiscoverymedia/shows. And for all our current shows, go to What's New. We are supported by you, the audience. You'll see a nice big shiny blue button for one-time donations, or follow us on Patreon and you will be able to support us there. We enjoy bringing you such wisdom. And the next show will be up in just a moment.